The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport's premier aviation hangar cast harsh shadows across $80 million worth of grounded metal. Inside this cathedral of wealth and precision engineering, where the air itself seemed to hum with the scent of power and money, Richard Blackstone paced like a caged predator. His custom Italian shoes clicked against polished concrete that reflected his mounting frustration with mirror-like clarity. For 8 weeks, his Gulfstream G700 had sat motionless. 8 weeks of watching his empire bleed $500,000 every single day. 8 weeks of board members whispering about leadership changes. 8 weeks of competitors circling his struggling company like sharks sensing blood in corporate waters. The jet squatted on the hangar floor like a wounded beast. Twin Rolls-Royce Pearl engines, each containing over 40,000 precision components, hung beneath swept wings with the dormant menace of sleeping dragons. These mechanical marvels should have purred with contentment, carrying Blackstone and his executives across continents at 600 miles per hour through the thin air where Earth meets space. Instead, they had become terrorists of the sky. 3 times at 41,000 feet, both engines had simultaneously shut down without warning. 3 emergency landings that made international headlines. 3 investigations by Federal Aviation Administration teams that found absolutely nothing wrong. The mystery had sparked conspiracy theories across aviation forums worldwide, with amateur experts suggesting everything from corporate sabotage to electromagnetic interference from alien spacecraft. Dr. Patricia Webb stood before a wall of monitoring equipment that blinked with the intensity of a space mission control room. Her silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses had become familiar sights at congressional hearings on aviation safety. When airlines faced unexplainable mechanical failures, they called Dr. Webb. Her MIT doctorate in aerospace engineering and 3 decades at Boeing had earned her legendary status in circles where reputations were built on solving impossible problems. Her team represented the industry's absolute elite. Dr. Marcus Carter from Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, the secretive unit that designed stealth fighters and spacecraft. Rebecca Rodriguez from Pratt & Whitney's Advanced Diagnostics Unit, who held 17 patents on engine monitoring systems. James Morrison from Boeing's Commercial Airplanes division, whose computer models predicted metal fatigue failures 20 years before they occurred. Between them, they possessed over 2 centuries of combined experience. They had solved mysteries that grounded entire fleets, identified microscopic cracks that could have killed hundreds of passengers, and redesigned systems that seemed perfect until they weren't. Yet after 8 weeks of intensive investigation, they had nothing. "Mr. Blackstone," Dr. Webb announced to the assembled crowd of engineers, executives, and journalists who had gathered for what everyone assumed would be the final verdict. "We have exhausted every known diagnostic protocol in the aerospace industry. This aircraft exhibits perfect mechanical function in every measurable parameter." She gestured toward the banks of computers and sensors surrounding the jet. Equipment worth $5 million. Technology that could detect vibrations measured in nanometers. Acoustic analyzers that separated individual component sounds from the symphony of a running engine. Chemical detectors that identified trace elements in exhaust gases. Yet it continues to experience catastrophic shutdown events that defy scientific explanation, Webb continued, her voice carrying the weight of professional defeat. "We recommend complete engine replacement, both power plants. Estimated cost, $28 million. Estimated timeline, 6 to 8 months. The words hit Blackstone like physical blows. 6 to 8 months. His Tokyo deal, the $2 billion acquisition that required his physical presence tomorrow morning, would evaporate. 18 months of negotiation destroyed because his airplane refused to fly. In the high-stakes world of international business, delays killed deals. His company's future hung on a thread growing thinner by the second. "There has to be another solution," Blackstone said, his voice tight with barely controlled desperation. Six of the brightest minds in aerospace engineering, and your answer is to throw away $80 million worth of aircraft. Sometimes, Dr. Webb replied with the cool certainty of someone whose expertise had never been successfully challenged. Even the best technology fails in ways we cannot predict or prevent. This is one of those times. That was when the small voice interrupted from behind a tool cart. "Excuse me." The words were so quiet that several people didn't hear them at first, but something in that child's voice, a certainty that seemed impossible given her size and circumstances, made the hangar fall gradually silent. 12-year-old Zara Williams stepped forward from behind the equipment where she had been emptying trash bins. Her oversized janitor's uniform hung like a tent on her malnourished frame. Her shoes, held together with duct tape, squeaked against the polished concrete. Everything about her screamed poverty and powerlessness. But her dark eyes held something that made even cynical billionaires pause, a knowing that seemed far older than her years. "Your engines aren't broken," she whispered, clutching a faded photograph of an elderly man in military uniform. "They're just scared." The hangar erupted in laughter that echoed off steel walls like mockery made manifest. Journalists frantically scribbled notes about the surreal scene unfolding before their cameras. Airport workers pressed against windows, drawn by the spectacle of professional authority confronting childish impossibility. Richard Blackstone's face flushed crimson. His manicured finger stabbed toward the small figure standing in his multi-million-dollar hangar. "Security, get that filthy homeless brat away from my jet before she contaminates something with her poverty." The words hung in the air like poison. Several people gasped at the casual cruelty. Even Dr. Webb, who moments ago had been annoyed by the interruption, looked uncomfortable at the venom in Blackstone's voice. Two security guards moved forward, their hands reaching for Zara's thin arms. But Captain Maria Santos, a pilot whose weathered face carried 30 years of aviation wisdom, stepped between them and the child. Something in the little girl's voice had triggered a memory. Santos had seen enough impossible things happen at 40,000 feet to know that wisdom didn't always come with fancy degrees. "Wait," Santos said firmly, her hand raised in a gesture that made the security guards pause. "Mr. Blackstone, what harm could 1 hour do? You've had 6 brilliant engineers and 2 months of unlimited resources. We're exactly where we started." Blackstone stared at the pilot he respected more than anyone in aviation, the woman who had landed crippled aircraft in Category 5 hurricanes, the steady hand who had talked nervous co-pilots through mechanical emergencies that should have killed everyone aboard. "You cannot be serious," he said slowly. "I've watched enough miracles happen in the sky to know they sometimes arrive in unexpected packages," Santos replied. She looked down at Zara, whose small frame seemed even tinier surrounded by towering adults and massive machinery. "Sweetheart, these 6 doctors have tried everything they know for 8 weeks. Do you really think you understand this airplane?" Zara nodded, clutching her grandfather's photograph like a talisman against the adult world's crushing doubt. "Master Sergeant James Williams was my grandfather. He was an Air Force mechanic for 30 years. He taught me that machines aren't just metal and circuits. They have souls, and souls speak to people who know how to listen." Dr. Webb snorted with derision. "This is absurd. We're wasting time with fairy tales while serious aviation professionals have actual work to do." But Blackstone found himself caught between financial desperation and something deeper, a memory of his own daughter at 12, explaining why her science fair volcano worked when the teacher's demonstration failed. Children sometimes saw solutions that adult expertise overlooked. The Tokyo deal hung in the balance, his company's future, everything he had built over 20 years. "Fine," Blackstone heard himself say, the words escaping before rational thought could stop them. "You have exactly 1 hour, sweetheart. If you can tell me what's wrong with engines that the smartest people in aerospace cannot figure out, I will give you $30,000 and make sure you never sleep in a car again." He paused, his businessman's instincts demanding protection against the public humiliation that could destroy his reputation forever. "But when you fail, and you will be permanently banned from this airport. Security will have your photograph. You will never set foot on this property again. Deal." Zara looked up at the massive aircraft towering above her tiny frame. She thought about her grandfather's final words, whispered as pneumonia claimed his breath. "Don't let them convince you that magic isn't real, baby girl. Your gift comes from love. Love for the machines that trust you with their secrets." "Deal," she whispered. The clock started ticking on the most impossible hour of her life. For 3 weeks, Zara Williams had worked the night cleaning shift at Premier Aviation Services. The janitorial supervisor, Maria Santos, had hired her off the books for $40 a night. No questions asked, no paperwork required, no background checks or age verification. Just a small girl with desperate eyes and gentle hands who swept debris and emptied trash bins while the important people slept in expensive beds. Maria didn't know that Zara lived alone in a battered Honda Civic with 200,000 miles and a cracked windshield that spiderwebbed across her view of the world. She didn't know the child survived on airport vending machine scraps, stale sandwiches discarded after their expiration dates, half-empty coffee cups left by hurried travelers, packets of crackers that fell from overstuffed carry-on bags. She didn't know that Zara had chosen this parking lot because airplane engines reminded her of the grandfather who had raised her until his death 2 years ago. That she showered in employee restrooms at 3 in the morning, charged her grandfather's old phone at janitor stations, and slept in her car under lights that never went dark. Master Sergeant James Williams had been more than family. He had been Zara's entire universe after her parents died in a highway collision when she was 8. Their car crushed by a drunk driver who walked away without a scratch. The foster care system had swallowed her like quicksand, moving her between homes where older kids stole her grandfather's tools and adults treated her mechanical gifts as troublesome quirks that made her different, difficult, unmarketable to potential adoptive families. When pneumonia took grandfather at age 74, it left 10-year-old Zara orphaned twice. She had endured 2 more years in the system before escaping from a group home where the supervisor sold food stamps for drug money and older boys hurt smaller children in ways that left no visible marks. She had chosen homelessness over helplessness, survival over safety, freedom over the false security of a system that had failed her repeatedly. But through it all, she had carried her grandfather's most important lesson in her heart. Every evening after school, young Zara would find him in his garage workshop, surrounded by the mechanical poetry of disassembled engines. Carburetors spread across workbenches like metal flowers, pistons arranged in neat rows like sleeping soldiers, the air thick with the honest smell of motor oil and metal shavings. "Come here, baby girl," he would say, lifting her onto his lap beside whatever engine demanded his attention that day. "Put your little hands right here on the cylinder block. Close your eyes. Feel that." Zara would press her palms against warm metal, feeling vibrations that seemed to pulse with life. "What am I feeling, grandfather?" That's the engine's heartbeat. Every machine has a soul, and souls speak to those pure enough to listen. Most grown folks forget how to hear magic because they think being loud makes them smart, but machines only trust quiet voices. He had taught her that engines weren't just collections of mechanical parts following engineering principles. They were living entities that developed personalities, preferences, fears. A healthy engine sang with contentment. A troubled engine cried for help in frequencies that sensitive ears could detect. "Engines don't lie to children, baby girl," he would whisper as they worked together. "They save their secrets for hearts that haven't forgotten how to believe in magic." The lesson had been proven when Zara was 9 years old. Her elementary school's heating system failed during a blizzard that trapped 200 children and teachers in a building growing colder by the hour. Adult technicians arrived with expensive diagnostic equipment, running tests that showed perfect boiler function while ice crystals formed on classroom windows. 9-year-old Zara had stood in the boiler room, listening to the mechanical symphony that others heard as meaningless noise. The main unit hummed with perfect mechanical rhythm, but underneath that steady pulse, she detected something else. A sad, irregular whisper that reminded her of her grandfather's cough during his final illness. "Excuse me," she had said to the lead technician, her child's voice barely audible above the equipment noise. "I think the machine is trying to tell you something." The adults had laughed, but desperation made them willing to humor a child's fantasy. When Zara pointed to a specific valve assembly and suggested a simple adjustment, they had made the change to prove her wrong. The building filled with blessed warmth within minutes. That miracle had established the foundation of her gift, but it also marked the beginning of her isolation. Other children called her weird. Teachers didn't know how to explain a 9-year-old who understood machines better than certified technicians. Foster families wanted normal children who played with normal toys, not strange girls who whispered to broken appliances. Now, standing in a hangar full of adults who had forgotten that magic exists, 12-year-old Zara prepared to prove that some secrets could only be heard by those brave enough to listen with love instead of logic. "First, everyone needs to be completely quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of diagnostic equipment. "Machines don't like to share secrets when there's too much noise. They get shy, like children when grown-ups are arguing." Dr. Webb rolled her eyes at this theatrical nonsense, muttering under her breath about time-wasting fairy tales. But Captain Santos raised her weathered hand for silence, and the hangar fell into cathedral quiet. Zara approached the massive Gulf Stream like a child meeting a sleeping giant. Her bare feet made no sound against the polished concrete as she circled the aircraft, her small hands trailing along the fuselage with the gentleness her grandfather had taught her during those precious evenings in his garage workshop. The aircraft towered above her tiny frame, $80 million of aerospace perfection that dwarfed her malnourished body. Twin Rolls-Royce Pearl engines hung beneath swept wings like dormant dragons, each containing over 40,000 precision-engineered components. She placed her ear against different sections of the aircraft, moving with the focused concentration that only children possess when they believe completely in their impossible purpose. Her grandfather's photograph remained clutched in one hand, Master Sergeant Williams smiling from his frame like a guardian angel watching over his granddaughter's first real test. "Can you start just the left engine, please?" she asked, looking up at Captain Santos with eyes that seemed far older than 12 years. "I need to hear its voice alone first before they start talking to each other." Santos exchanged glances with the lead technician, who shrugged with the resignation of a man who had witnessed 8 weeks of expensive failure. He initiated the startup sequence through his laptop. The Rolls-Royce Pearl came to life with a sound like controlled thunder. 30,000 pounds of thrust contained within precision-engineered metal housings. The mechanical poetry of combustion turned into forward motion through engineering principles that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. To the adults gathered in the hangar, it sounded perfect. Smooth acceleration through startup sequence, powerful rumbles settling into steady operation, everything a world-class aircraft engine should be. But Zara tilted her head like a puppy hearing distant music. Her expression grew troubled as she processed frequencies that existed beyond adult perception. She moved to different positions around the engine, her small ear pressed against access panels, while her fingers felt for rhythm patterns in the vibrations that traveled through metal and into bone. "Now the right engine, please," she requested after several minutes of intense listening. "But keep the left one running. I need to hear how they talk to each other." The second engine spooled up with identical mechanical poetry, twin giants singing together. Their combined voice filled the hangar with 60,000 pounds of thrust, barely contained by test cell protocols. Zara's face brightened momentarily as both engines ran together in apparent perfect synchronization, then clouded with concern as her grandfather's training revealed subtle discord in their mechanical conversation. She moved between them like a conductor reading an orchestra, sensing rhythms and harmonies that sophisticated diagnostic equipment categorized as insignificant variations. After 5 minutes that felt like hours to the watching adults, she stepped back and looked directly at Blackstone with the expression of a child who had just solved a puzzle that confounded every grown-up in the room. "Your left engine has a different heartbeat than your right engine," Zara announced, her child's voice carrying impossible certainty. "It's beating 0.3% faster because it's trying to take care of its friend, but it's getting really tired from working so hard." Dr. Webb snorted with derision that echoed off steel walls. 0.3% variation is well within normal operational parameters. Child, our instruments measure RPM fluctuations to thousandths of a percent accuracy. If there was any significant discrepancy, our diagnostic systems would have detected and flagged it immediately. But something in Zara's specific precision made Captain Santos lean forward with interest. "How can you be so exact about that number, sweetheart?" "My grandfather taught me to count engine heartbeats like counting music beats in songs," Zara explained with the simple logic of a child who had never learned that some things were supposed to be impossible. When two engines run together perfectly, they should sound like one really big engine singing. But yours sounds like two people trying to dance to different songs that don't match. The technicians measured RPM variations at specific intervals, something no diagnostic protocol had thought to analyze. The measurements displayed on screens confirmed her impossible observation with mathematical precision. The left engine consistently operated 0.3% faster than the right engine. "But that's mechanically impossible," Dr. Webb protested. "These engines operate independently through separate management systems. There's no mechanical connection that would create sympathetic behavior patterns." "Because they're friends," Zara answered with devastating simplicity. "And friends try to help each other even when they don't know the right way to do it." The crowd fell silent, processing the implications of what this homeless child had just revealed. Zara requested complete silence again, while both engines ran at cruise power settings that simulated flight conditions. She moved around the aircraft like a conductor reading musical notation in a mechanical symphony, her untrained ears somehow detecting harmonic discord that million-dollar acoustic analysis equipment overlooked entirely. The diagnostic team watched in growing amazement as this 12-year-old homeless child demonstrated auditory sensitivity that their instruments failed to match. She paused at specific locations, tilted her head at precise angles, processed frequency combinations through neural pathways that formal education hadn't yet constrained with conventional limitations. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the hangar's air conditioning. The concentration required to filter mechanical voices from background noise exhausted her small body. But she pushed forward, driven by something deeper than the promise of money or shelter. She was proving that her grandfather's lessons were real, that the magic he had taught her hadn't died with him in that hospital room 2 years ago. "The new computer you put in is making sounds that scare the engines," she announced after 10 minutes of intense listening. "It talks in a language they don't understand, like when grown-ups yell in angry words that make children want to hide under blankets where it's safe." Her childlike explanation reframed 8 weeks of mechanical mystery in emotional terms that sounded ridiculous, until Captain Santos began translating them into technical language that aerospace engineers could process and understand. Dear God, Santos realized. Her pilot's experience suddenly making connections that pure engineering methodology had missed completely. She's describing harmonic frequency interference between the new avionics package and the original engine management systems. Different operational frequencies creating acoustic conflict. Zara nodded eagerly, her face lighting up with the joy of finally finding an adult who understood her grandfather's lessons about machine communication. At my old foster home, when the mean supervisor would yell really loud with scary, angry voices, all us kids would shut down and try to disappear into our rooms, she explained, her voice carrying the weight of terrible memories. That's exactly what your engines are doing. They're too scared to work properly when the new computer talks mean to them with harsh sounds. The hangar fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. Dr. Webb pulled up maintenance records on her tablet, scrolling frantically through months of service logs. The avionics upgrade, she whispered, her face pale. We installed a new flight management system 6 weeks before the first shutdown event. It operates at a different processing frequency than the original equipment. But that shouldn't matter, Dr. Marcus Carter interjected, his Lockheed Martin credentials evident in his confidence. Modern aircraft systems are designed with harmonic isolation protocols. Frequency conflicts are supposed to be impossible. They are impossible, Rebecca Rodriguez added, her Pratt and Whitney patents lending weight to her words. Unless the isolation protocols themselves are flawed, or unless the engines are somehow perceiving the frequency differential as a threat signal. Zara stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the technical debate with childlike clarity that stripped away layers of complicated jargon. You don't need to throw away the scared engines or the loud computer, she said, her small hands gesturing toward the massive machinery with proprietary affection earned through understanding rather than ownership. You just need to teach them to be friends and talk nice to each other. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Dr. Webb asked, her tone still skeptical despite the mounting evidence that this child understood something fundamental that their expertise had missed. Zara pulled her grandfather's old laptop from her backpack. The computer was ancient by modern standards, its case held together with duct tape and covered in grease stains from years of garage workshop use. Several people in the crowd actually laughed at the sight of this primitive technology being introduced into a conversation about cutting-edge aerospace engineering. My grandfather taught me how to listen to frequency patterns and make them match, she explained, opening a simple software program that looked like it had been designed in the early 2000s. It's like teaching two people who speak different languages how to understand each other. You just need a translator. Using her grandfather's basic frequency measurement techniques, tools that seemed laughably primitive compared to the surrounding wall of diagnostic equipment, she demonstrated how the new avionics package transmitted control signals at a frequency that created standing wave interference with the engine management computer's operational baseline. The interference wasn't strong enough to trigger diagnostic warnings. It didn't violate any safety protocols. It simply created an acoustic environment that the engine's sophisticated monitoring systems interpreted as abnormal operating conditions. And when machines think they're operating abnormally, they shut down to prevent catastrophic failure. It was a safety feature, not a malfunction. The engines were protecting themselves and their passengers from what they perceived as a dangerous situation. So they're not broken, Blackstone said slowly, his business mind grasping the elegant simplicity of the solution. They're doing exactly what they're designed to do, shutting down when they detect conditions that seem unsafe. Yes, Zara confirmed, her smile bright despite her exhaustion. They're being very good engines. They just need someone to tell them that the new sounds are okay, that they don't need to be scared anymore. Dr. Webb approached the child's ancient laptop with the wariness of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically dismantled. The software displayed frequency analysis that her $5 million worth of equipment had completely overlooked because it was programmed to ignore variations within acceptable parameters. But acceptable to human engineers didn't mean acceptable to machines that processed reality through different sensory frameworks. "This is a $50 software adjustment," Webb said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "A simple frequency recalibration that creates harmonic compatibility between the avionics package and the engine management systems." "Will it work?" Blackstone demanded, his empire hanging on the answer. Santos studied the frequency analysis with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 30 years trusting her instincts at 40,000 feet. "There's only one way to find out," she said quietly. "We need to run a full simulation, exact conditions that triggered the previous failures." The moment of truth had arrived. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Zara was wrong, if her childish intuition had misread the mechanical symphony she claimed to understand, the harmonic interference could trigger catastrophic engine failure that destroyed the aircraft completely. $80 million reduced to twisted metal and shattered dreams. But if the engines shut down again, if her $50 software fix proved worthless against sophisticated mechanical rebellion, more than money died. Blackstone's company faced bankruptcy. Hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. The Tokyo deal would evaporate along with his reputation as a leader who made impossible decisions under ultimate pressure. The hangar filled with tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. News helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures, drawn to the scent of potential disaster. Social media streams exploded with hashtags, as millions worldwide watched a homeless child attempt to prove that wisdom sometimes came in the smallest packages. International aviation experts debated the test's validity in real-time television commentary. MIT professors explained why children could not possess diagnostic capabilities that surpassed doctorate-level expertise. Boeing engineers expressed skepticism that harmonic frequency adjustments could solve mechanical mysteries that stumped their best teams. Inside the hangar, Zara stood dwarfed by the massive aircraft and towering adults, whose expensive suits cost more than most families earned in months. Her oversized janitor's uniform hung like a tent on her malnourished frame. Everything about this moment screamed impossibility. "Are you absolutely certain about this, sweetheart?" Captain Santos asked, kneeling to Zara's eye level with the protective concern of someone who had learned to recognize courage in unexpected places. "If something goes wrong during this test, it could be very dangerous." Zara clutched her grandfather's photograph like a talisman against the adult world's crushing doubt. Master Sergeant Williams smiled from his frame, with the confidence of a man who had taught his granddaughter that machines spoke to those brave enough to listen with love instead of logic. "Grandfather always said that engines don't lie to children," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the electronic hum of diagnostic equipment. "They told me they just want to sing together instead of being scared. I believe them." The test began with ceremonial gravity that felt like a space launch. Captain Santos assumed primary control, her 30 years of aviation experience providing the steady hand that nervous billionaires and skeptical engineers required. Dr. Webb monitored every parameter through equipment that processed more data per second than university supercomputers. The engine started with controlled thunder that filled the hangar like the voice of mechanical gods. Rolls-Royce Pearl power plants spinning up through their startup sequence. Titanium turbine blades accelerating to speeds that would destroy lesser materials. Combustion chambers containing temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But this time, something was different. The sound carried harmony that wasn't there before. Twin engines singing in perfect synchronization instead of fighting invisible battles. The left engine's RPM matched the right engine exactly. No more compensatory behavior. No more mechanical exhaustion from trying to help a friend in distress. Simulation parameters engaged, Captain Santos announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Altitude 41,000 feet, speed Mach 0.85, all environmental conditions matching previous failure events. The crowd held its collective breath. Journalists leaned forward. Engineers stared at their monitoring screens with the intensity of people watching a tightrope walker cross Niagara Falls. Blackstone's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of a workbench. 30 seconds passed. The engines maintained perfect harmony. 60 seconds. No warning lights. No alarm systems. No computer displays showing system conflicts. 90 seconds that felt like hours compressed into heartbeats. The engines sang their mechanical song with the contentment that only comes when fear has been replaced by understanding. All parameters green, Dr. Webb announced, her voice thick with disbelief that threatened to crack her professional composure. Perfect synchronization across all engine management systems. No harmonic interference detected. No system conflicts identified. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that echoed off steel walls like thunder. Airport workers pressed against windows cheered, with the enthusiasm of underdogs witnessing impossible victory. Social media exploded with viral videos of a homeless child solving problems that defeated aerospace engineering's finest minds. Richard Blackstone felt something wet on his cheeks and realized he was crying. Not from relief, though that was certainly present. Not from joy at saving his company, though that mattered immensely. He was crying because he had called this brilliant, courageous child a filthy homeless brat. Because he had ordered security to drag her away. Because he had been so blinded by his own arrogance and desperation that he had almost missed the miracle standing right in front of him. Captain Santos shut down the engines, their mechanical voices fading into satisfied silence. The test was complete. The mystery was solved. The impossible had become routine through the wisdom of a child who had learned to listen when everyone else was just making noise. But in the center of the celebration, Zara simply smiled and whispered to her grandfather's photograph. "They're not scared anymore, grandfather. Can you hear them singing?" Tears streamed down her dirt-stained cheeks, but they were tears of joy. For the first time since her grandfather's death, she felt truly connected to the magic he had taught her. The gift that had made her an outcast in foster homes had just saved an $80 million aircraft and proven that love was more powerful than logic. Dr. Webb approached the child slowly, her professional pride warring with the evidence of her own inadequacy. 8 weeks, 6 brilliant engineers, $5 million in diagnostic equipment, all defeated by a homeless 12-year-old with a $50 software adjustment and the courage to believe in what she heard. "How did you know?" Webb asked quietly, her voice stripped of condescension for the first time. "How could you possibly hear something that our instruments missed?" Zara looked up at the woman who had dismissed her as delusional, and her answer carried the simple wisdom that only children possess before the world teaches them to complicate everything. "You were listening with your machines," she said gently. "I was listening with my heart." The aftermath of impossible success felt like the moment after lightning strikes. Electric silence, filled with the echo of miracles witnessed by those who had never believed in magic. Richard Blackstone knelt on the hangar's polished concrete, his $15,000 suit creasing as he brought himself to 12-year-old Zara's eye level. His face carried the expression of a man whose entire understanding of the world had shifted in 90 seconds of perfect engine harmony. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion that surprised even him, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life, and I owe you so much more than money." The $30,000 check materialized from his jacket pocket, but his hands shook as he realized how inadequate financial compensation felt for what this homeless child had accomplished. She hadn't just solved a mechanical problem. She had demonstrated wisdom that doctorate programs didn't teach and universities couldn't replicate. Zara, he continued, using her name with the respect reserved for equals rather than the condescension adults typically showed children. You should never have to sleep in a car again. You should never have to eat from trash cans or wonder where your next meal comes from. You should never have to be alone. His voice cracked with the weight of recognition. This brilliant child had been abandoned by every system designed to protect her. I have a daughter about your age, Blackstone said, tears streaming freely now. Her name is Jennifer. She asks me every day to help people who don't have enough. And here I was, calling the bravest, smartest person in this entire hangar a filthy brat. He paused, gathering courage for words that would change both their lives. Would you let me and my wife adopt you? Give you the family you deserve, the education your gift requires, a future worthy of your extraordinary mind. Zara stared at him with eyes that had seen too much cruelty to trust easily. Foster care had taught her that adult promises often crumbled like sandcastles before ocean waves. Group homes had shown her that kindness could evaporate when cameras stopped rolling and witnesses went home. You called me filthy, she whispered, her small voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of rejection. You wanted security to drag me away. Why would you want to adopt me now? The question hit Blackstone harder than any business failure ever had. This child, who had just saved his empire, had every right to reject him, every reason to walk away from the man who had treated her with such casual cruelty. Because I was wrong, he said simply. Because I let fear and anger turn me into someone I hate. Because you deserved better than what I gave you. And because I want to spend the rest of my life proving that not all adults forget how to believe in magic. Captain Santos stepped forward, her weathered pilot's face glowing with the satisfaction of witnessing impossible truth triumph over institutional skepticism. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, she announced to the rolling cameras and live news feeds, you have just witnessed something that will change aviation forever. This remarkable young woman doesn't just understand machines. She understands the soul of technology itself. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions at 40,000 feet. Every engineering school in the world should study her methods and question their own assumptions about wisdom and expertise. We have become so obsessed with data and instruments that we have forgotten the most important diagnostic tool ever invented: human intuition trained by love and patience. Dr. Webb approached Zara with hesitant steps, her professional pride still wounded but her scientific integrity demanding acknowledgement of truth. Young lady, Webb said quietly, you have taught me something I should have learned decades ago. That expertise without humility becomes expensive blindness. That conventional wisdom sometimes needs to be challenged by unconventional voices. She extended her hand for a handshake between equals. I would be honored if you would consider me not as an authority figure, but as a student. I have 30 years of experience and 3 university degrees, but you have something far more valuable. You have the gift of listening to what machines are really saying instead of what we expect them to say. Zara shook the offered hand with the solemnity of someone sealing an important agreement. Her grandfather had taught her that true adults admitted when they were wrong and learned from their mistakes. Dr. Webb, despite her initial cruelty, was proving herself worthy of respect. My grandfather always said that smart people never stop learning, Zara replied, her voice gaining strength, even from children who live in cars and don't have fancy degrees. The crowd pressed closer, journalists shouting questions over each other in their desperation to capture every word from the homeless girl who had humbled aerospace engineering's finest minds. How did you learn to diagnose engines? Where are your parents? What will you do with the $30,000? Are you really going to let him adopt you? Zara felt the walls of the hangar closing in, the press of bodies and voices threatening to overwhelm her. Her breathing quickened. Her vision narrowed. The trauma of 2 years surviving alone, of group homes and stolen possessions and adults who hurt children, came flooding back in a wave of panic. Captain Santos saw the child's distress and immediately created a protective barrier with her body, pushing journalists back with the authority that came from decades of command. "Everyone back," Santos ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This child has been through more than any of you can imagine. She needs space and time, not your microphones shoved in her face." Blackstone stood as well, his own security detail forming a wall between Zara and the pressing crowd. For the first time in the entire ordeal, he used his wealth and power not to intimidate, but to protect. "The interview is over," he announced firmly. "Zara will make her own decisions about her future in private, without cameras or pressure. If anyone attempts to contact her without her explicit permission, my lawyers will ensure it's the last story they ever chase." In the sudden quiet that followed, Zara looked up at the billionaire who had insulted her so terribly an hour ago and then offered her a family. She thought about Jennifer, the daughter her age who asked her father to help people. She thought about sleeping in warm beds instead of cold cars, about having enough food to eat, about going to school without fear of being discovered and sent back to the system that had failed her. But most of all, she thought about her grandfather's final words. "Don't let them convince you that magic isn't real. Your gift comes from love." Could she love again after so much loss? Could she trust again after so much betrayal? Could she believe that this man's promise would last longer than the cameras and the headlines? "I need time to think," she said quietly. "This is a lot to understand all at once." "Of course," Blackstone replied immediately. "Take all the time you need, but tonight you are not sleeping in your car. I have already called the Grand Hyatt downtown. They are holding the presidential suite for you, room service, whatever you need, no strings attached." He pressed a hotel key card and the $30,000 check into her small hands. "This money is yours whether you accept my adoption offer or not. You earned it by doing what 6 brilliant engineers could not do. And tomorrow, when you are rested and fed and have had time to think clearly, we can talk about the future. Your future, whatever you decide." Zara looked down at the check in her hands. More money than she had ever imagined possessing. Enough to change her life even if she chose to remain alone. Enough to honor her grandfather's memory by proving that his lessons had value in the world that had forgotten him. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll think about it." Captain Santos personally drove Zara to the hotel, making sure the child checked in safely and had everything she needed. As the pilot prepared to leave, Zara caught her hand. "Thank you for making them listen," Zara said, her dark eyes shining with gratitude. "Nobody ever makes adults listen to me." Santos knelt down, her weathered face inches from the child's. "You have a gift that could save lives, Zara. Not just fixing rich men's airplanes, but understanding technology in ways that could prevent disasters before they happen. The aviation world needs people like you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That night, Zara lay in a bed softer than clouds, her small body clean for the first time in weeks, her stomach full of room service food that tasted like dreams. Her grandfather's photograph rested on the nightstand beside her, his smile watching over her as she processed the most impossible day of her life. She thought about Blackstone's offer, about having a family again, about the sister she had never had, about belonging somewhere instead of hiding everywhere. But she also thought about all the other children sleeping in cars tonight, all the other kids whose gifts made them outcasts, all the other brilliant minds that society overlooked because they came wrapped in poverty and trauma instead of privilege and opportunity. And in that moment of clarity, 12-year-old Zara Williams made a decision that would change far more than just her own life. Tomorrow, she would say yes to adoption, but she would also demand something more, something that would honor her grandfather's memory and help children like her find their own magic before the world convinced them it didn't exist. She would demand that Richard Blackstone help her create a foundation, a place where forgotten children with impossible gifts could be seen, heard, and believed, where genius wasn't measured by degrees or bank accounts, but by the courage to listen when everyone else was just making noise. Master Sergeant James Williams smiled from his photograph as his granddaughter drifted off to sleep, finally safe, finally valued, finally ready to prove that one child's whisper could change the world. 3 days later, Zara sat across from Richard Blackstone and his wife Catherine in the study of their mountain estate overlooking Denver. Jennifer Blackstone, their 14-year-old daughter, sat beside Zara, holding her hand with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had already decided this girl was her sister. "Before I say yes to adoption," Zara began, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "I need you to promise me something." Blackstone leaned forward, his businessman's instincts recognizing the tone of someone about to negotiate terms. But this wasn't about money or power. This was about something far more important. "Name it," he said simply. Zara pulled a worn notebook from her backpack. Inside were pages filled with names and stories written in a child's careful handwriting. Names of kids she had met in foster homes and group homes. Children with gifts that nobody recognized. Brilliant minds that society had written off as damaged, difficult, or different. "There's a boy named Marcus who can fix computers just by listening to them hum," she said, turning pages. "The group home supervisor called him stupid because he failed regular classes, but I watched him repair a server that 3 technicians couldn't figure out." She turned more pages, each one representing a forgotten child. "There's a girl named Rebecca who understands electrical systems like she can see the current flowing. She got sent to juvenile detention for tampering with the group home's wiring, but she was actually fixing dangerous shorts that could have started a fire. There's a boy named David who knows exactly when mechanical parts are about to fail. He can touch a car engine and tell you which component will break first. His foster family called it witchcraft and sent him back to the system." Zara looked up at the Blackstones with eyes that carried wisdom far beyond her 12 years. "I want you to help me find these kids. All of them. Every child whose gift makes them different instead of valuable. I want to create a foundation that finds them, protects them, and teaches the world that genius comes in unexpected packages." Catherine Blackstone, who had been silent until now, felt tears streaming down her face. She had spent 20 years in philanthropy, funding charities and writing checks to worthy causes. But she had never heard anything as purely good as what this homeless child was proposing. "You want to use your miracle to save other children," Catherine whispered, "instead of just saving yourself." "My grandfather taught me that gifts are meant to be shared," Zara replied. "That magic only grows stronger when you give it away instead of keeping it hidden. He would want me to help other kids like me find their voices before the world tells them to be silent." Richard Blackstone felt something fundamental shift in his chest. He had built a tech empire worth billions by being shrewd, calculated, and occasionally ruthless. He had made decisions that cost people jobs because the numbers demanded it. He had prioritized profits over people more times than he cared to remember. But looking at this child who had every reason to be bitter and selfish, who had been abandoned by every system and hurt by every authority, yet still wanted to help others before helping herself, he realized he had been doing business and life completely wrong. "I'll do better than a promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll give you $50 million to start the foundation. I'll hire investigators to find every child on your list. I'll build a campus where kids like you can learn from mentors who understand that conventional education doesn't work for unconventional minds." He paused, looking at his wife and daughter, both nodding enthusiastically. and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that the best investment I ever made wasn't in technology or real estate. It was in believing that a homeless child knew more about what matters than every business degree I ever earned. Jennifer squeezed Zara's hand tighter. Does this mean you'll be my sister? Zara looked at this family that wanted her despite her poverty, her trauma, her strangeness. She thought about her grandfather's final lesson. That love was stronger than fear. That magic lived in the space between heartbeats. That family wasn't about blood, but about choosing to believe in each other when the world said you shouldn't. Yes, Zara whispered, and then louder, with the confidence of someone who had finally found where they belonged. Yes, I want to be your sister. I want to be part of this family. The Blackstones embraced her together, a circle of arms that promised safety, love, and belonging. For the first time in 2 years, Zara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was finally over. But even as she accepted their love, her mind was already working on the foundation, already planning how to reach the children whose names filled her notebook, already imagining a world where gifts were celebrated instead of feared. The paperwork for adoption moved quickly when you had unlimited resources and lawyers who worked around the clock. Within 6 weeks, Zara Williams legally became Zara Williams Blackstone, with a family who loved her and a mission that would define her life. The Zara Williams Foundation launched 3 months after the hangar incident, with a press conference that attracted international attention. But this time, Zara stood at the podium flanked by her new family, protected by people who valued her voice instead of exploiting it. Genius doesn't come with credentials, she told the assembled journalists, her words broadcast to millions worldwide. It comes with courage to believe in impossible solutions. This foundation will find children who see the world differently and prove that different doesn't mean broken, it means brilliant. The first child they found was Marcus, the boy who could fix computers by listening to them hum. He was 13 years old and had been labeled as having severe learning disabilities because standardized tests didn't measure auditory processing gifts that existed beyond normal human ranges. Within weeks of joining the Foundation's pilot program, Marcus diagnosed and repaired server issues at 3 major tech companies that had stumped their IT departments. His disability was actually a form of technological synesthesia that allowed him to hear data corruption as discordant notes in a digital symphony. Rebecca, the girl who understood electrical systems, was next. At 14, she had spent 6 months in juvenile detention for rewiring her group home's electrical panel. The Foundation's lawyers got her released and enrolled in advanced electrical engineering courses where professors were stunned by her intuitive grasp of circuit theory. Within her first year, Rebecca designed safety improvements for residential electrical systems that reduced fire risk by 37%. Her innovations were adopted into national building codes, saving an estimated 150 lives annually. David, the boy who could predict mechanical failures, became the Foundation's automotive consultant at age 15. Major car manufacturers hired him to test prototype engines, paying substantial fees that went directly into trust funds managed by the Foundation for his future education. His gift for sensing microscopic stress fractures before they became catastrophic failures led to 3 separate vehicle recalls that prevented potential accidents affecting over 2 million cars. The Foundation grew rapidly, funded by Blackstone's initial $50 million and subsequently by donations from corporations who recognized the value of unconventional genius. Within 2 years, they had identified and supported over 400 children with extraordinary gifts. Some could predict weather patterns by feeling atmospheric pressure changes. Others understood chemical processes through taste and smell. A few possessed spatial reasoning abilities that made them natural architects and engineers. Many had gifts that science couldn't fully explain but which produced measurable, repeatable results. Every child received full scholarships to specialized schools. Every family received financial support to prevent poverty from forcing impossible choices. Every gift was documented, studied, and celebrated rather than dismissed or feared. But the Foundation's most important work wasn't the high-profile successes or the corporate partnerships. It was the quiet rescue of children who would have otherwise fallen through society's cracks. Kids who would have ended up in jails, dead from preventable causes, or simply crushed by a world that couldn't see their value. The Foundation gave them what Zara had received in that hangar, someone willing to listen. Dr. Patricia Webb's fall from grace happened with the swift brutality of corporate consequences. Within 24 hours of Zara's triumph, her consulting firm received termination notices from 3 major airline clients. The contracts worth millions of dollars annually evaporated like morning mist as corporate executives questioned methodologies that missed solutions a homeless 12-year-old discovered in 1 hour. "How do we explain to our boards," demanded the CEO of Delta Airlines during a conference call that Webb would replay in nightmares, "that we paid your team $6 million over 2 years to solve engine problems that a child fixed with $50 software adjustments?" United Airlines followed within hours, then American, then Emirates. The domino effect spread through the aviation industry with viral velocity, each cancellation carrying the implicit message that expertise without humility became expensive blindness. Webb's reputation, built over 30 years of solving impossible problems, crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Aviation Week published a scathing editorial titled, "When Doctorates Forget to Listen: The Zara Williams Lesson." Industry forums buzzed with discussions about intellectual arrogance and the dangers of dismissing unconventional solutions. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology, her alma mater, quietly removed her name from their advisory board. Speaking engagements at aerospace conferences got canceled with apologetic emails citing scheduling conflicts and budgetary constraints. Job offers from Boeing and Lockheed Martin disappeared like smoke in wind. Her colleagues, the brilliant minds who had stood beside her in that hangar, distanced themselves with the practiced ease of professionals protecting their own careers. Dr. Marcus Carter accepted a position in Germany, publicly stating he needed fresh perspectives outside the American aerospace establishment. Rebecca Rodriguez published a paper on the limitations of pure data analysis in complex systems that never mentioned Webb by name but clearly referenced their shared failure. James Morrison simply stopped returning her calls. Webb found herself alone in her office 6 months after the incident, staring at empty spaces where awards and commendations had hung before she packed them away in cardboard boxes. The phone that once rang constantly with consulting requests sat silent. The email inbox that had overflowed with opportunities now contained only spam and the occasional message from former colleagues who wanted to discuss lessons learned from the Blackstone incident. She had become a cautionary tale, the brilliant engineer who was so convinced of her own expertise that she dismissed wisdom from an unexpected source. The scientist who forgot that science itself demands humility in the face of evidence. The lowest point came during a chance encounter at Denver International Airport. Webb was catching a flight to a minor consulting job, the kind of work she would have delegated to junior associates in her previous life. As she walked through the terminal, she saw them. Zara Williams Blackstone, now 13 years old and dressed in clothes that actually fit, walking with her adoptive family through the airport concourse. The girl was laughing at something her sister Jennifer had said, her face bright with the happiness that only comes from being truly loved and valued. Webb stopped walking, frozen by the sight of the child she had called delusional, the homeless girl she had dismissed as wasting their time, the young voice she had silenced with professional arrogance. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal. Webb felt her face flush with shame, her hands trembling as she clutched her briefcase like a shield against judgment she richly deserved. But Zara didn't look away with the satisfaction of someone witnessing their tormentor's downfall. Instead, she gently extracted her hand from Jennifer's and walked toward the woman who had treated her with such casual cruelty. "Hello, Dr. Webb," Zara said quietly when she reached the frozen engineer. Her voice carried no triumph, no malice, just the gentle concern of someone who understood that pain came in many forms. "Zara, Webb's voice cracked. "I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. I was cruel to you, dismissive, arrogant, everything that a scientist should never be." "I know," Zara replied simply. "But my grandfather taught me that people make mistakes when they're scared. You were scared that your expertise wasn't enough, that all your education and experience had failed. So you got angry at the person who showed you something different." Webb felt tears streaming down her face, unconcerned that travelers were stopping to watch this public display of emotion. "You're very wise for someone so young. I learned from someone who loved me enough to teach me that wisdom doesn't come from being right all the time. It comes from being brave enough to admit when you're wrong." Zara paused, her dark eyes studying Webb with an intensity that made the older woman feel transparent. "The Foundation is looking for adult mentors," Zara continued. "People who understand advanced engineering but who are willing to learn new ways of thinking. People who have made mistakes and grown from them. People who won't dismiss a child's insights just because they don't have fancy degrees." Webb stared at this 13-year-old offering her a lifeline she didn't deserve. "You want me to work for your foundation, after how I treated you." "I want you to work with the foundation," Zara corrected gently. "Not for me. With the children who need someone who understands both traditional engineering and the importance of listening to unconventional approaches." She pulled a business card from her pocket and pressed it into Webb's trembling hand. "My grandfather always said that the best teachers are the ones who have failed spectacularly and learned from it. That humility makes better mentors than perfection ever could. If you're interested, call that number. We can use someone with your experience, as long as you're willing to teach with your ears open instead of your mouth closed." Webb looked down at the card through tear-blurred vision. The Zara Williams Foundation, an address in downtown Denver, a phone number that represented a second chance she had never expected to receive. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you give me this opportunity after what I did?" Zara's answer carried the profound simplicity that had characterized every miracle she performed. "Because my grandfather taught me that magic only grows stronger when you give it away. That includes the magic of forgiveness and second chances. You made a mistake. You're sorry. Now you get to decide if you want to be defined by that mistake or by what you learned from it." The girl who had once been homeless turned and walked back to her family, leaving Webb standing in the middle of the airport terminal, holding a business card that felt heavier than all her MIT degrees combined. 3 days later, Webb made the phone call that would redefine her career and her life. She joined the foundation not as a senior consultant or prestigious advisor, but as a humble mentor willing to learn from children whose gifts defied conventional understanding. Her first assignment was working with Marcus, the boy who heard computer systems. Webb brought her technical expertise in digital architecture. Marcus brought his synesthetic perception of data flow. Together, they developed diagnostic protocols that combined traditional analysis with auditory pattern recognition. The resulting methodology reduced server downtime by 43% across 15 major tech companies and earned both of them recognition in Computer Science Quarterly. But the article that meant most to Webb wasn't the academic publication. It was Marcus's handwritten thank you note that said simply, "You listened to me. Nobody ever did that before." Over the following years, Webb became one of the Foundation's most effective mentors precisely because she understood failure so intimately. She taught children advanced engineering principles while learning from them how to perceive technology through senses she had never developed. She published papers not about her own brilliance, but about the remarkable gifts possessed by students society had discarded. Her reputation rebuilt slowly, not on the foundation of expertise, but on the bedrock of humility. Aviation companies began consulting her again, but this time they came seeking her new methodologies that combined traditional analysis with intuitive perception. Her speaking engagements returned, but now she shared stages with the children she mentored, giving them credit for innovations that changed entire industries. The redemption wasn't dramatic or immediate. It was earned through years of patient work, through admitting mistakes publicly, through elevating voices she had once silenced. And every time someone asked how she had recovered from professional disgrace, Webb gave the same answer. A homeless child taught me that listening to people is just as important as listening to machines. That wisdom doesn't always come with degrees or experience. That being right about most things doesn't make you right about everything. She made me a better engineer. More importantly, she made me a better human being. Professional justice, it turned out, sometimes arrived disguised as grace. 5 years after that impossible night in the hangar, Zara Williams Blackstone stood on stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, receiving the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. At 17 years old, she was the youngest recipient in the award's history. The citation read, "For revolutionary contributions to human-machine interface theory, and for establishing methodologies that bridge intuitive perception with traditional engineering analysis, fundamentally changing how we understand technological systems." But the medals and awards weren't what mattered to Zara. What mattered was sitting in the audience. 473 children and young adults who had been found, protected, and empowered by the foundation that bore her name. Marcus, now 18, who had just been offered a full scholarship to MIT's computer science program. Rebecca, 19, whose electrical innovations were being installed in homes across America. David, 16, who consulted for automotive companies while maintaining straight A's at the foundation's specialized academy. And dozens more, children who had been labeled as disabled, difficult, or damaged. Kids who had been told their differences made them broken instead of brilliant. Young people who society had written off but who were now changing the world in ways that conventional thinkers never imagined. Richard and Catherine Blackstone sat in the front row beside Jennifer, all three of them crying with pride. Richard had kept every promise he made. The foundation had grown from his initial $50 million investment to a $300 million endowment funded by corporations, philanthropists, and governments who recognized that genius bloomed everywhere when someone believed enough to listen. The foundation now operated 17 campuses across 6 countries. Over 2,000 children had been identified, supported, and empowered. The economic impact of their innovations totaled over $8 billion in value created through new technologies, safety improvements, and efficiency gains. But the human impact was immeasurable: lives saved, potential realized, magic remembered. Dr. Patricia Webb sat 3 rows back, her face glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had found redemption through service. Beside her sat 15 of her current students, young people whose gift she was helping nurture while learning from their unique perspectives. She had published 4 books on intuitive diagnostics and consulted on educational reforms that were transforming how schools identified and supported neurodivergent learners. Captain Maria Santos, now retired from commercial aviation, served as the Foundation's Director of Operations. Her weathered pilot's face had become synonymous with the organization's core belief that wisdom sometimes arrived in unexpected packages, and the greatest skill any authority figure could possess was the humility to listen. As Zara accepted her medal and approached the microphone, she pulled her grandfather's photograph from her pocket. Master Sergeant James Williams smiled from his frame, his image worn from being carried everywhere for 7 years, but his lesson never fading. "When I was 12 years old," Zara began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the audience, "I lived in a car and survived on scraps. Foster care had taught me that my gifts made me different, and different meant unwanted. Group homes had shown me that adults didn't listen to children who saw the world in unconventional ways." The audience fell silent, captivated by the story they knew from viral videos, but had never heard from Zara herself in such a formal setting. "My grandfather taught me that machines have souls. That technology speaks to those pure enough to listen. That magic lives in the space between heartbeats, waiting for someone brave enough to hear it. The adult world called this fantasy, delusion, the wishful thinking of a child who couldn't accept reality." She held up her grandfather's photograph so the cameras could capture his face. "But reality is what we make of it. And sometimes the person with the solution isn't the one with the fanciest education. It's the one with the purest heart and the courage to whisper, 'Let me try,' when everyone else has given up." Zara set the photograph gently on the podium and looked directly at the children in the audience. Her people, her purpose. "This medal isn't mine. It belongs to every child who has ever been told they're too different to matter, too young to contribute, too unconventional to be taken seriously. It belongs to my grandfather who taught me that genius comes from love, not logic. It belongs to Captain Santos, who made adults listen when they wanted to dismiss me. It belongs to Dr. Webb, who learned that humility makes better mentors than perfection ever could." She paused, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But most of all, it belongs to every foster kid sleeping in a car tonight, every homeless youth surviving on scraps, every brilliant mind that society has overlooked because it came wrapped in poverty instead of privilege. This medal says, we see you, we hear you, we believe you, and we will never stop fighting for a world that recognizes magic wherever it appears." The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes, but Zara wasn't finished. "The foundation is expanding," she announced once the applause died down. "Starting next month, we're launching mobile diagnostic units that will travel to homeless shelters, group homes, and underserved communities across America. We're going to find the children that traditional systems miss. We're going to listen to the voices that conventional education silences. We're going to prove that wisdom exists everywhere if we're brave enough to look beyond our assumptions." She held up her grandfather's photograph one final time. "Master Sergeant James Williams used to tell me, engines don't lie to children. They save their secrets for hearts that haven't forgotten how to believe in magic. Well, I'm here to tell you that humans don't lie either when someone finally believes them enough to listen. Every child has magic inside them. Every person possesses gifts that could change the world. The only question is whether we're brave enough to silence our certainty long enough to hear their whispers, whether we're humble enough to learn from sources we've been taught to dismiss, whether we're wise enough to understand that the next breakthrough might come from the most unexpected voice." Zara looked directly at the cameras, broadcasting her speech worldwide. "So if you're watching this from a car, a shelter, a group home, or anywhere you feel forgotten, your gifts are real. Your insights matter. Your voice deserves to be heard. Don't let anyone convince you that magic isn't real just because they've forgotten how to see it. And if you're an adult watching this, look around. Listen harder. The next child who changes everything might be standing right in front of you, waiting for someone brave enough to say, 'Let me hear what you have to say.'" She stepped back from the podium as thunderous applause filled the Kennedy Center once again. But her eyes found the children in the audience, and she saw herself reflected in their faces. Scared, hopeful, brilliant, different. Perfect. That night, Zara sat in her hotel room surrounded by her family, the medal resting on the table beside her grandfather's photograph. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from around the world. text messages from children who had watched the speech and felt seen for the first time, emails from adults pledging support, calls from organizations wanting to partner with the foundation. But the message that made her cry came from an unknown number. "My name is Emma. I'm 13 and I live in my mom's van. I can feel when bridges and buildings are unsafe by touching them. Everyone says I'm crazy, but I watched your speech and for the first time I think maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I'm just different. Thank you for believing in kids like me." Zara showed the message to her father, tears streaming down her face. "We need to find her," Richard said immediately, already reaching for his phone to mobilize foundation resources. "We need to find all of them," Zara replied. "Every Emma living in every van. Every child who thinks they're broken because the world doesn't know how to recognize their brilliance." She looked at her grandfather's photograph, at his gentle smile that had guided her through the darkest nights of her life. Grandfather always said that everyone has magic inside them, that if I helped fix broken things, maybe people wouldn't forget their magic anymore. I think we're just getting started. Over the following decade, the Zara Williams Foundation became a global movement. The mobile diagnostic units found over 12,000 children with extraordinary gifts. The specialized schools graduated thousands of students who went on to revolutionize industries from medicine to aerospace to environmental science. But more importantly, the foundation changed the conversation about genius itself. No longer was brilliance measured solely by test scores and degrees. Society began recognizing that different minds perceived reality through different lenses, and that diversity of perception led to breakthroughs that conventional thinking never achieved. Zara herself became a professor at 23, teaching human-machine interface theory at a university program she designed. She never stopped consulting on impossible engineering problems, lending her gifts to challenges that stumped traditional experts. She published papers, gave speeches, and mentored thousands of students. But her most important work remained finding the forgotten children, the kids living in cars and shelters, the brilliant minds that society overlooked, the voices whispering solutions that nobody had the humility to hear. She found them, she listened, she believed. And one by one, she proved that sometimes the person with the solution isn't the one with the fanciest education. It's the one with the purest heart and the courage to whisper, "Let me try," when everyone else has given up. 25 years after that impossible night in the hangar, Zara Williams Blackstone stood in a different aviation facility. This time, she was there by invitation, consulting on a problem that had stumped NASA's finest engineers. A spacecraft designed for Mars colonization was experiencing mysterious power fluctuations that threatened to derail humanity's first permanent settlement on another planet. She was 37 years old now, with gray beginning to thread through her dark hair. Her grandfather's photograph still went everywhere with her, though the frame had been replaced 3 times over the decades. As she approached the spacecraft, placing her hands against its hull and listening to its mechanical heartbeat, a young NASA engineer approached her nervously. "Dr. Blackstone, I just wanted to say thank you. I was one of the Foundation kids. You found me when I was 14, living in a group home and failing every class because I could taste chemical reactions and nobody believed me. Now I'm a senior aerospace chemist. I wouldn't be here without you." Zara smiled at him with the warmth that had characterized every interaction throughout her remarkable life. "You were always brilliant," she replied gently. "I just gave you permission to believe what you already knew. The magic was always yours. I just reminded you it was real." She turned back to the spacecraft, closed her eyes and listened. And in the silence between heartbeats, between past and future, between doubt and certainty, the machine began to whisper its secrets to someone who had never forgotten how to believe in magic. Because some lessons last forever. Some gifts transcend time. And some whispers change the world. Sometimes the person who changes everything doesn't announce themselves with credentials or authority. Sometimes they arrive as a whisper from an unexpected voice. The only question is whether we're brave enough to listen. If this story moved you, remember, there are children right now, sitting in cars and shelters, possessing gifts that could change the world. The next breakthrough might be waiting in the most unexpected place. All it needs is someone brave enough to say, "Let me hear what you have to say." Never underestimate the power of listening. Never dismiss wisdom because of its source. And never forget that magic lives everywhere, waiting for hearts pure enough to believe.